better wake up. The world you live in is just a sugar-coated topping. There is another world beneath it, the real world. And if you want to survive it, you better learn.
Yo, 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 welcome to the show. This is your host, me, he who is free, also known as Levi McFly. Lend me your ear, I am here to ponder who, what, where and why. Here to separate truth from lie. Here to defy the all-seeing eye. Here to make it clear, I will not comply. The author rising, podcast talker, the vampire hunter, the daywalker, the alchemist activist. This is alchemical activism aimed against those who are deranged, whose aim is to hack your vision. If you're slack, you're giving your tacit permission for them to make us fall when they install communism, fascism, globalism. Basically turn this world into a prison. These demented Decepticons are on a mission. So listen. You know what? They try to turn us into a robot. Form a trance, transform and make us GoBot. Not me though, I'm a C3 without the PO. Free from the Matrix, I love the Trinity like Neo. Free like liberty, free like a trio. The optimistic, optic mystic. Helping you see this reality is not realistic. It's misreported, distorted, scripted, topsy-turvy, upside down, inverted, twisted. No more harming me or harming you. This is full harmony. This is 4free2. No more harming me or harming you. This is full harmony. This is 4free2. No more harming me or harming you. This is full harmony. This is 4free2. No more harming me or harming you. This is full harmony. This is 4free2. Alright, welcome to the show. Today we've got a very special guest. I'm really looking forward to this chat. It's been one that I've been very excited about. We have Teace Snyder. I'm going to allow Teace to introduce himself because you probably do a better job than I do. So Teace, how are you first of all? And give us a little introduction to yourself, you know, where you're from, where you're at, what you're about, that kind of thing.
Sure. So thanks for having me here. And as far as what I'm all about is I'm an artist, and my art centers around controversy because I think that art is supposed to be the lens that allows us to view things that are very controversial and painful in a way that makes it more socially acceptable, and things that we're able to talk about in an open forum that otherwise would be kept behind closed doors. So throughout my entire life, that's what has been the focal point of all of my different creative pursuits, is talking about the most uncomfortable things in a way that makes people not necessarily run the other way. And so that's still what I'm doing in the contemporary, and I've bridged that to more focusing explicitly on the reality and not having it just about the narrative lens or framing it in that way. And so I've created the show Conspiracy Synergy, and that delves into the situation that we're in as a species and trying to bring awareness to a variety of different, very corrupt institutions and how they've pooled together in order to steer the direction of the species at large. And we're all kind of tired of that. So we'd like to take the reins back, liberate ourselves from the bullshit, and plant a garden instead. So that gives you kind of like a little bit of where I come from, what I'm after, and where I intend to go.
Cool. So you said sort of your focus was more controversy, and now you've kind of steered towards the conspiratorial angle of things. At what point did you make that kind of transition from one to the other? Has it always been there, or have you kind of gradually gone that way?
Well, they're one and the same. I guess the analogy I'd use is that it's like in an intuitive sense, I understood that the compulsory school system was always like evil and it was designed to destroy who we are as human beings. But I didn't necessarily have like the factoids or the points of history to be able to articulate that. to adequately address the system for what it is, which is that it's a prison. When you're in school, in compulsory school system, you're in prison. And it's not a system that's broken by chance, it's a system that's broken by design. So a good way to think of a lot of what these systems are is that we can be aware of them very well in one sort of realm, but we don't necessarily connect the dots to the why. So it's like if you're getting whipped by something, you know that it hurts you, but you don't necessarily understand the motivation behind it. So I always understood the pain, but I didn't understand that it was something that you could trace back to understand through the lens of social engineering. And so, as you go through the process of understanding controversy, which is usually the pain that we're in, it inevitably connects you to conspiracy, which is the people who are causing the most pain.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when would you I don't like to use the term waking up, you know, that sort of, especially now with all this woke stuff, which seems to have kind of, yeah, sort of mutated the understanding of what being awake is, maybe. But when would you say you've kind of got to that point of your perception being what it is now?
So I came like I make the contention that reincarnation is very much a thing, and that we as people in whatever you want to describe this existence as, whether it's a digital like practice arena that we're in, if it's a like multidimensional, whatever language you want to use, I basically think that it's something that we run more than once, and some of us experience things within those various different incarnative blips that aren't necessarily linear in their expression or in our reception. And so I'll say that, like, I always knew that I was going to be a writer. And from a materialist perspective, you can look at that very simply and just say that I was a smart kid who didn't feel that I was able to articulate myself adequately to be taken seriously as a human being. So, in an intuitive way, I understood that I needed to refine that skill set in order to be present in the room. And I can understand that because all of my parents are kind of like psychologists, so I come from a very heady and heavy environment. And if you're not present in those rooms, it can weigh on you. So you want to make sure that you're up to it. In another sense, I can look at it as like the way in which nature sort of gives you things from the future out of order. It sort of like puts you through necessary trials and tribulations in order to build you up to a point of culmination that required you going through that in order to reach it later on. And so, like, the whole process of waking up, I like that you don't even necessarily regard it in that way because, one, you're never completely awake. You're always in the process of waking up. Depending on what your conscious awareness is within this mortal incarnation, that can potentially spill into other lives and can spill into the way in which we pass things genetically through generations. It can spill into any number of denominations of what you can regard as like borderline paranormal abilities, but really it's just like you have an intuitive sense of something beyond yourself and you do your utmost to gravitate towards it with authenticity. And so I always felt as if the seed of wanting to know was there, and the skill set of pursuing it using art and being a writer was always there. I came preloaded with that wherever it is I came from. And maybe it's just whispers from my future telling it to myself now in some way that I can't necessarily find the words to accurately describe, but I'm sort of just giving you a felt sense of it from a qualitative perspective. And that's that's sort of just like what my felt sense of going through the journey has been, that it's something I came here with. It's something I'm supposed to fulfill and continue to explore why I'm here. And the full culmination of that, I myself won't be really aware until it happens later.
Wow. You know, you asked me if I had like a plan or a structure to the conversations, and I kind of had this idea of going a bit deeper a bit later, and we've just dived straight in them. So
Yeah,
that's good. That's
it
good.
all happens at once, you know.
Yeah,
Like,
it does. Yeah, that's the way it is. I did want to speak to you. I think you kind of alluded a bit to maybe sort of synchronicity and that kind of thing. Um, and yeah, the more spiritual components of this process, which I think is fundamental myself personally. And, you know, in terms of, you know, that's why I don't like the term waking myself, because I often contemplate, you know, I always hear these stories of awakening, and I wonder from my own point of view about awakenings. And I feel similar in a way that you kind of always was aware of the hypocrisy and that kind of thing. And my awakening would probably be more attuned to that spiritual component of it, that understanding of the being more. That was my true awakening, but it is intertwined with conspiracy as well. For whatever reason, maybe because that's the kind of the realization that that's kind of what you're what's been hidden, occulted, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean, so the idea of what's hidden and what's in plain sight, or what's out there for us to be able to see and recognize for uh, not necessarily what it is, but on a surface level, what we interpret it as, and that's a lot of what this is. It's not just what something is; it's how many different layers do you get into about something, and then so from a Jungian perspective, he uses the term individuate, which is to simply up your conscious awareness of the various different forces in nature that either speak to you or speak through you, and then integrate that into yourself so that there's no longer contradictions. And like so the idea of knowing about things that they exist and then coming to terms with that and accepting that for what it is, that's the expansion of consciousness. So it makes
Yes.
sense that there'd be a spectrum of that emergence across our experience on this earth, and that some of us would have kind of like we'd pop open a little bit sooner so that we'd be able to be receptive to it and then help transmute either the resonance or simply the words and the influence or effect that the passing of that knowledge has onto the people who have yet to hear them.
Yes. Wow, I said that we dived in the deep end. I want to go back to reincarnation.
Yeah.
Because funnily enough, I was contemplating possibly today or very recently. It was just I was hearing some sort of talk. So I listened to so much that I struggled to piece where it came from, but it was on the mind,
Yep.
synchronistically, you could say. So in fact, it was yesterday. I was listening to an old something from Graham Hancock, funny enough, and he was going into reincarnation.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I've always troubled with, and I was thinking when he was talking about himself with reincarnation, is the idea that it kind of alludes to life going on in one way, but at the same time, if you are reliving, in essence, you have died and it's again. Do you see what I'm saying? So how does that fit? If life goes on and you're having constant experiences through that reincarnated process, I guess you're kind of alluding to it on the basis that you're suggesting that there's a part of you that is on a path already. So subconsciously, I guess maybe you're in tune with that previous experience. But at the same time, you've kind of gone through this process now. And I mean, from my point of view, if I have those deja vus and other thoughts and feelings, like I've been to places that I've never been before, that I have a real strong feeling or that I have been there. But ultimately, my life experience is now. So how do you bring them together?
Yeah, so the first point of orientation in that is distinguishing between what we're regarding as a past life, a previous incarnation in a different body than the one that a person regards themselves in this present moment, versus something that could be past life recall or extrasensory perception to another individual's experiences in life that you are simply a recipient to. So that's distinguishing between what you would regard as your own felt experience of something in a different body versus simply tapping into maybe like some sort of memory bank that's stored in existence, like the Akashic record. So if you're able to, like, in your perceptual awareness, catch a glimpse of something, perhaps it's strong enough that you would confuse that for your own experience. So there's that. And as you move into it, it sort of becomes a lot of differentiating and delineating and understanding what is the basis for going about making the contention of one phenomena actually being what it is as we describe it. And so then you have the idea of time not being linear. And so if time isn't even linear, it's like, well, is it past life? It's like, or can you potentially have a future life and then be influenced in this one? You can look at it from a biological perspective of that whenever the embryo is forming of a woman and her eggs, the eggs are fully formed at the point of that like fetus forming, such that there's an overlap genetically between three different generations in a single body at one point in time. So a lot of what's transpiring extends so far beyond the framework of our direct exposures and into basically like quantum entanglements and entwinements across all of space and time, all of the things that you have experienced, have yet to experience, how they've affected you. It becomes one of these things where it's like you're not just navigating lives, you're navigating time. And it becomes very, very complicated and convoluted because we can, on the basis of our felt experience of how real something is, therefore contend that that makes it real based on the explanatory framework that we subscribe to something, not necessarily what actually transpired. And so what you see with like past life recall and the literature that goes into that, it's about 4 to 6 years that you have those kind of blips of recollection showing up within children. But after that, it starts to kind of get paved over and replaced. And there's different levels of sensitivity and different levels of awareness, and you can go into like the literature of it in different ways. Look at the Egyptians. I don't even believe they had a word for death, because for them it was a continued experience. In the esoteric, people used to prepare themselves to die so that you'd be able to transition in accordance with what your life's mission was intended to teach you. Because in the esoteric, what the solar system is, it's our soul system. It's a school. And so all of these different kind of things, depending on if you're looking at from a materialistic lens of the genetic material that transfers from one generation to the next, versus is there something that extends significantly beyond the materialist realm altogether, which is that it's not just past life recall in the periphery of our sensory experience, but literally we have lived past lives before. And then you extend that out to look at like the way in which that's talked about in Hinduism and other Eastern traditions, with having all of these different kind of spheres of consciousness, which is the mineral kingdom, the animal kingdom, the plant, and that whole kind of thing, the garden, and then human beings. And the premise being that with human beings, by the time you reach that point, all of those other kingdoms are within you. And so there are all these different, like this whole spiel of references and points of entry into that notion. But then when you enter into that notion, it becomes an ocean. And that's one of those things where swimming through that can take not just one lifetime, but all of them.
Yeah, infinite possibilities requires a infinite time to explore it, I guess.
Yeah, kind of.
There's no cap on it. Can you give some examples of your own sort of synchronistic experiences? Like you sort of alluded to having them. I said I feel synchronicity is a picture that I really want to paint to the audience for those that haven't had that experience, because I feel that everyone has.
Yeah.
They maybe just don't realize it.
No, it's not one of those things that kind of whispers in the periphery until eventually it hits the right note and it becomes like the central focus of you expanding your awareness, and it's like, so even if you don't think it's happened to you, there's been a whisper that you probably just haven't clued into, and eventually you'll catch it and then you'll be able to build off of it. And so that sort of synchronicity and synchromysticism by which nature comes to speak to us, and sort of us speaking to ourselves. And you can think of that as you in a future point of time, or as like spirit guides, or like all of these different explanatory frameworks. A lot of when I explain things, I try and give a variety of different of like interpretations, because I found that a lot of people are like segmented by the language that they use to describe something. So
Sure.
My personal experience of it have been a combination of the way in which ideas come to me creatively, which is kind of just like flashes that are usually sort of accompanied with music. There are number sets that I follow that evolve. There are a variety of different sort of metaphors in nature and in dreams. It becomes one of these things where it's always there, but it's not necessarily putting the full weight of your focus on it, more just like appreciating it for what it is and then integrating it into the way in which you go about life. Because otherwise you can get so lost in the symbols that you follow the wrong sign. And it's sort of, I've found with myself, a difficult balancing act of catching the right metaphor that things that are infinitely more intelligent than yourself are trying to pass along to you, and not being so struck by it that you're caught off guard, or that you betray yourself, or that you're afraid of whatever the forces in nature that are trying to teach you are trying to show you. Because ultimately it is for your greater good and the greater good of everyone to take that individuated form into your individual, process that shadow work, and then the synchronicities as you do that evolve with you. And so it's one of those things where it isn't static. And as much as it started in one place and one resonance, you're a part of receiving it as much as you're part of sculpting it.
Yes. Wow. Sorry, that's you're just hearing you is you're a mind blower, mate. And it's quite funny because when I sort of watched your videos, you asked about me sort of viewing your content. I have seen most of it, and it's you sort of what I've been sort of drawn to from your work, from what I've seen, is that I do have this weird fetish with conspiracy stuff where I've been aware of it and I've been studying it for God. Like I said, I'm not even sure how long, but I started studying it intensively, back to 2007, 2006. So I've got a good grasp of it, but for some reason, I find when I've come across somebody that breaks it down from the start again, I find that really appealing for some reason. And I find that's what I find with your work is you kind of take me back to the start and reintroducing stuff. It's all stuff that I know already, but it's the way that you put it, I guess, has an appeal. So I'm kind of treading a familiar path from a different point of view, basically, I guess. And
I agree with that perspective. Actually, I found Passio very helpful in that regard. So if anyone wants to kind of just start down the path again and just sort of like get accustomed with the familiars, you're right that it can be very beneficial for all of us. And he was someone who helped me do that in my own kind of like pursuit of the truth.
Yeah, it was funny. I seen that video actually where you suggested people that you would recommend to view, and I actually have always struggled with that because I've come from so many angles, and I've listened to podcasts galore. I've consumed it constantly. I do it when I'm working, so I've lost track. Like I said earlier, I forgot Graham Hancock because I've listened to him and God knows how many other people just in the last day,
Yeah.
But one thing I've struggled with is trying to relate it to other people, and I've always thought, who would I recommend? There's people that I enjoy, and I know why I enjoy them, but when I sort of feel if I want to try and introduce this to somebody who's not familiar and is trying to kind of get a grasp generally, I always find a fault somewhere along the lines with somebody, But when I've always thought Corbett would be my first choice. And it's funny, you had exactly the same guy as your number one guy. So, we're on the same page there. I guess he kind of comes from an angle that's so believable. I mean, I didn't want to get too deep straight away. I want to kind of go with the basics, almost the mundane, because I feel that's what people that are coming from that are not familiar with this kind of thing, they need to kind of, they're a bit stuck in the mundane. So they need to kind of come from a mundane perspective and then go down that rabbit hole as such. And, I like say someone like David Icke. I love David Icke. I like listening to him, but I know he's going to rub people the wrong way. He's going to take it to places, and I'm not going to go into why or that kind of stuff because I don't like to say anybody's this or that. I just take what I can from them, and I take the good. I like Alex Jones as well. I'm aware of what people say about him. I've never listened to him properly myself, but when I've come across him, I've seen him make good points, and he amuses me, entertains me. I've always thought he had a bit of a WWF or WWE voice about him, so that kind of puts him into a context straight away, if you know what I mean. But yeah, Corbett, I feel he's got that vibe about him that he's not going to put you off. He's not going to take you somewhere where you can sort of rebut it and say, no, come on, that's a bit too far. He's taking it to an angle that I don't want to go to. Even Passio. I like Passio, but Passio, I think I would be wary of recommending to people because I think he's very hard hitting, isn't he? Mm-hmm. So you have to have a certain.
I agree with your assessment of it, and I've been doing this insofar as like the narrative scaffolding that I've used to attempt to reach out to people for issues that agitate them, bother them, or that they have preconceived misconceptions about. So volatile and visceral that you literally cannot even approach them or they'll run the other direction. And that's, in essence, the primary hurdle that we're faced with. It has nothing to do with the information. It has to do with how it makes people feel about the information. So my entire show was created to fill the place that we're alluding to now, which is that there isn't really a singular introduction to the full scope of the world and all of its various connections that we feel would be comfortable for those on the receiving end who haven't been exposed to any of this. And you talking about Corbett as being your number one reference for that, and my number one reference for that as well, is important because he's come at it from a pragmatic, long built, very well composed and engaging infrastructure of CorbettReport.com and all that he's done with that. And he hasn't gone too hardcore into the real depth of conspiracy, which is more of what I was kind of talking about when you get into the occult and the esoteric and moving outside of materialism and stuff like that. And that's something that a character like Passio would do more of, but he's so angry about it and so just explosive all the time, even more than like a figure like Alex Jones is, that it pollutes the truth with how pungent it can be for those who have never caught a whiff of it anywhere. And the idea that it's everywhere would just be so disgusting that they'd feel like they were drowning in shit. So on a subconscious level, people are very averse to it and they avoid it. And we describe that as cognitive dissonance, but I don't think that it's cognitive dissonance so much as it is everyone being turned into a Goldilocks. And if you're in a Goldilocks situation where you think that everything should come to you in the way in which it's been sold to you or told to you in your entire life, like a lot of people, it's not so much about the facts of the matter, it's about the wrapper. So if you give them the right wrapper, then they'll just blindly accept the facts of the matter. So if we understand that as an integral part of our outreach to the public at large, then you can take a show like mine, Conspiracy Synergy, and you can use that as the introductory wrapper for all different kinds of facts of the matter, and then it proliferates and disseminates outward from there. So you got to get over those emotional hurdles before we as a community can go anywhere.
Yeah, I agree with that fully. I mean, what was your thinking with the idea of a conspiracy synergy? Is that whole synergy of the conspiracy and bringing it together, how it connects? And
yeah, it's
as
really,
you said,
it's the idea that it's an emotional issue that people cannot come to terms with. And I describe it thusly: it's like if people had never seen a car before and you drove one up to them, they'd be like, "That's a dragon. That's a dragon. You're a magician. That's insane." But if you broke down the car and showed, no, these are all the different parts, they'd still be very confused. If you taught them to assemble those parts into a car, to drive them around normally, to manufacture them themselves, to teach their children about it, it would cease to be a dragon. It'd just be custom. It'd be customary. So what this is the gradual transition of our initial shock at observing very sophisticated interactions of parts that we previously didn't understand. And once they're all on the table, we can get familiar with it, and we're not just calling everything a muffler anymore. Everything isn't just the Illuminati. It's like, that's a very particular thing. That was Adam Weishaupt, Bavarian Illuminati. It's the word for the enlightened. It has a lot of different connections, but that doesn't mean that that's how everything works. So once you understand that these are very particular parts that snap together historically, you're able to build it so that it actually becomes the reality. It is the car that we mistook for this like horrific monstrosity haunting us from behind the scenes. No, it was just people who understood how these systems interact, and they were using them for their own benefit at our detriment. And now we're upping our understanding and we're able to put an end to it.
Yeah, I think you alluded earlier to so you said about cognitive dissonance is not just cognitive dissonance. And when you was talking about synchronicity earlier, you said about how maybe it's not all comfortable. There is an uncomfortable aspect to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the connection between the two. Like I said, from my point of view, in my own personal path, synchronicity's played a major part in it. And it's a fantastic thing that I want to share with people, but I understand through my own experiences that exactly as you said, you have to have a balance with it. So I get, as much as I want people to be aware, I get why they don't want to be.
Well, I'll put it this way. If you, in your trajectory of oversight from that broader view of the phenomena of what's happening on this earth, are familiar enough with yourself and where other people are at, you can approximate where they're at in their own trajectory. And so it's not your job to get them all the way up. That's a bad idea. They're not going to get there.
No.
You can try, but it's not going to work. Instead, think of it like the lift of an airplane. It comes up slowly before eventually it can get enough to be able to actually accelerate its inclination. Some people aren't even at the point of being off the ground yet. You got to understand that. So all you got to do is add them a little bit more momentum with the questions that you pose to them. And if we all do that, then you get enough momentum behind them that they're able to take flight very quickly. So within your own knowledge base, use that to calibrate and assess where they're at in their trajectory of gathering enough momentum to get off the ground. And then and only then can they make those further connections, because otherwise it's just fucking impossible.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Just completely. You've got to, I suppose, everyone in their own time as such. You can't.
Yeah.
That's the old Matrix cliche saying, I can only show you the door as such, that kind of thing.
Well, before
from
that,
your own point.
Well, hold on. Before that, you'd have to teach them the word for door. So even before you show them the thing, there would be all these other basics that are established in their development of character. And that's sort of what I'm alluding to. It's like there are all these preconceived exposures that we've gotten. Maybe you're not even supposed to teach someone something. You're just supposed to frame it another way. So it's like everyone in their own time. But the more that we all go about changing our minds more often and become more versatile and dexterous with that, it speeds up everyone else's time. And that's the really incredible thing about this. So yes, everyone in their own time, but freedom doesn't just set you free, it sets you to work freeing. So the more that this happens, the more it happens for everyone, you know?
Yeah, definitely. What, from your own experience, have you found most uncomfortable in terms of coming to terms with your own perception? What if there's something you kind of almost wish you didn't know as such?
I haven't enjoyed life simply because I'm so far ahead in my perceptual blips of awareness that it makes it uncomfortable as fuck just trying to be around other people. And that applies to a certain extent with my own kind of shadow work and what it goes through to come to appreciate what that is, heal from it. It's a constant journey in life. Yeah, all that stuff. But like being around other people who just don't get it at all, that's just like, that's brutal for me. It's like if you're hanging out with a bunch of Nazis and they do not see how they're Nazis, and you're trying to explain it to them like ABC, and they're like, I do not see that. And it's like, holy shit, maybe just don't murder or torture other people and get off on it. And they're like, but I'm not doing that. It's for the greater good. I'm such a great person. My name is Jeff. I like puppies and cupcakes. And it's like, dude, you can be a Nazi like puppies and cupcakes. You know, it's like, it's figuring out what morality is and explaining it to other people. The problem is it doesn't reveal that they're deeply empathetic and conscientious. A lot of the time it reveals that they're so deeply asleep that they hate you for trying to bring up the conversation. And that's where we're all at right now. So it's like we're in a very messy and uncomfortable transition as a species where we start to appreciate like the intricacies of these things that we have kept out of sight. And the raw barbaric brutality of that is so uncomfortable that it takes almost a lifetime to fully glimpse for what it is, because otherwise you'll just feel like you're drowning in shit.
That's absolutely spot on, man. I mean, I've always felt that myself. It is a struggle, but ultimately, personally, I kind of felt as much as it's a struggle, I've kind of enjoyed it. The struggle is trying to share it with other people.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it a struggle. And I see people don't want to know. But they don't understand that it's that not wanting to know is what makes it hard for everybody else. If everybody wanted to know, we could all enjoy this and gravitate towards a better place. But
so I agree with that, but it's like I don't think that people don't want to know. I think they very, very much do want to know. They just don't want to be responsible for dealing with it. So they want to know once other people are doing the work for them. Then they want to know and they want to take credit for being on board with it. But if you give them a problem that they don't feel either in their conscious or subconscious self that they're able to solve, they almost like ping pong it away from them as like hot potato, someone else's. And then those of us who have the aptitude for that, we inherit all those motherfucking potatoes. So I've been walking around with like 500 goddamn pounds of potatoes on my back my entire fucking life. I know where a lot of this shit is. I can lift a lot of it. But it's like I'm at the point where I got to plant that into fields and then show people where they can go and get their own. And only then do they clue into the fact that it's there at all.
Yeah. So how have you coped? I mean, the last 2 years in particular with all that's been going on there, that's been a struggle for everybody. How's that been for you, man?
Oh, it's a fucking nightmare, man. Like, because it literally is Nazism. And at any point, people who are easily riled up into that fever pitch of derangement can just go completely off the rails. You think that like it has to happen slowly. That's very true, but people pop and they crack within that environment. And when you're in that environment all the time, it just makes you feel like the agitation of that like Oh man, it's really even hard to describe. It's just like if I'll put it this way: if everyone's in a really really hot room and there's one way out, people are gonna increasingly shoulder each other and elbow each other more and more until they're able to just get closer to that way out, and then it becomes like a class struggle and it becomes like a power struggle, and there are all these like things that go into any uncomfortable environment that gets worse over time. And so there were periods of time within like what was going on where it was really fucking bad for me, and not being able to communicate with my own family rationally, intelligently, emotionally in any capacity, because they had completely shut off their own conscious awareness and defaulted to whatever the state or the expert or the priest told them that they had to do. And there was no way to communicate with them. It was like they were nothing but a vessel for fear. And they still sound like rational people, even when they're vessels for fear. But it's that they do not have the ability to analyze, assess, or emotionally integrate any contradiction. All they can do is turn the other direction. And so you find yourself feeling more alone than you can ever possibly put into fucking words. Because there's a really great Robin Williams quote, and it's that he said, I used to think that being alone was the worst thing. Now I realize it's people who make you feel alone. That's the worst thing. And that's what COVID made those of us who were fully aware and awake and able to analyze it for what it was feel like, that everyone had turned into a goddamn fucking Nazi and we were completely alone. And at any goddamn second, they could snap and just turn into an animal because it made it easier for them to exist in that kind of environment than listening to us.
Yeah, man. What's things like over there right now? Well, you're Canada, is that right?
Yeah, we're in a
Canada?
shithole communist wasteland of statist worship, which is, if you really get right down to it, that's the entire world. People aren't up to the like conscious awareness of what natural law is, and that government is not there to lead you, it's there to oppress you under the auspices of leadership. And so Canada is a trial balloon, kind of like colonial backwater slum that has always been used to temper America. And like if you get into like you can read Matthew Ehret's books as a good point of reference for this, like Benjamin Franklin going up north to try and get the Canadians to like join in the War of Independence, but they wouldn't go along with it because they're still too deeply aligned with the Anglo-American establishment and their interest. And so Canada, like we're still very much just like we're kind of like the colonial backwash sort of. I don't know. I don't even. We're a neutered poodle that does our job very well. That's what it feels like being here. It's like that's all this shit is. The people are very nice, but holy fuck, it's brutal how well trained they are.
Yeah, I've heard that Canada's had it worse than most in the last couple of years with all the nonsense.
I don't know
But
about that.
obviously,
It's really tough. It's a good question. I don't know, but yeah.
yeah, I say I can't compare because I've only been here. Obviously, most of us been locked down wherever we're at with it.
Yeah.
I know. I've kind of had conversations about this before. I've always felt England's kind of the mothership in regards to this global conspiracy as such, and I find it fascinating how the different countries, particularly the ex-colonials as such, you know, particularly in this COVID sort of period, you know, Australia seems to have they've gone insane. America's gone their sort of way, Canada's gone that way, and different aspects of it. But England themselves, certainly in terms of lightening up a bit, seems to have almost led the way from what I've heard of that, which I found fascinating. I don't know what to make of it. We've you know, you could
Sorry, were you asking that as a question, or like were you still going?
no, just thinking out loud, sharing that thought process. I don't. Yeah, it's a question
Yeah.
and a
So
statement in one. Is that
yeah,
what would your thought process be of that? Because I didn't know what to make of it. I'm a bit suspicious.
when you get into a lot of how that shit actually works, it becomes so goddamn confusing and intricate that it's really difficult to differentiate and delineate. So on a certain level, the main arteries of the predatory exploitative class that is in the throne of power, whether it's in government, which are primarily puppets, or the various different think tanks and conglomerates and financial institutions and secret societies and what have you, that actually are the vestiges of power. And then ultimately, if you get into that, it funnels down to ideologies and systems in nature that you either subscribe to or are in alignment with or contradiction to. And when you get on that level, it's not even so much to do with people conscious choices so much as it is which version of timeline they've chosen to sort of like swim through, kind of. It's like, so it's like on a certain level, talking about any of this stuff, eventually it becomes more just like good and evil level shit. So
Yeah.
I can't go too far that direction before it becomes borderline incomprehensible and I have to talk for like hours to make sense of anything. So I'll keep it on the level of just like the three main vestiges of secret society historically, which have been Anglo-American establishment, Vatican Bank, and Zionism. And if you understand the Anglo-American establishment, that's preceded by MI6, which is the entwinement of the East India Trading Company as it overlaps with the monarchy, and then their entire bloodline being traced, or not their entire bloodline, but like to the dude who Vlad the Impaler, like the whole kind of like
Dracula.
yeah. I was going to say the dude who's Dracula named after, and so it enters into all of this shit. If you look at the land holdings in the contemporary, they're still the monarchy. If you look at all of how this stuff is actually working without going into the framing it as like the force of evil working through people, holy fuck, yeah. The city of London is doing very well. It seems as if this is like a transformer meticulous kind of like controlled demolition and a sequence of transmogrifications that cumulatively build to an unveiling almost like a phoenix that they want to see come out of the ashes over time. And my assessment of it is pretty similar to yours, is that it looks like uh, the major players in that are doing just great. They seem to have hedged their bets very well. And for people who don't understand, what America has basically been for the past few hundred years behind the scenes is kind of like a prophylactic for the interests of the monarchy and the crown to go about kind of like doing the world's dirty work with. You know, they can like fuck other countries and then just throw them away when they're all used up. And that's sort of what we're looking at right now. So major plays are being made by the major players. No one really seems to be losing. They just seem to be allowing the dominoes to fall that they want to, which then reveals the future that they're trying to usher us towards. That's my take on it anyway.
No, I've used that term myself in regards to where we're at, where we're going. This controlled demolition. That's exactly how I see it. And when people start alluding to, even things like the airports, and now we're sort of seemingly able to fly and all that kind of stuff. I don't know where you're at in Canada, but that's been a major factor for us. I went on holiday this year. Finally, I thought there's a point when I thought I couldn't. I've done it, and it was nice. But there's so much stories. Even now, still we can fly, but now people are having their holidays cancelled, and there's chaos at the airports, and people speak about it generally, and they don't understand it. And I think there's a very simple way of understanding it. It's a controlled demolition. That's what's going on here.
Yeah.
And as you said, I can go too far of it and get a bit too lost of it, but in very simple terms, that's what I see. I see a gradual destructive process that's being put into place on purpose.
Yeah.
And everything is falling apart. And I've always found, just generally with the way this world, if you want to try and make sense of the nonsense, you have to understand that if it doesn't make sense, or no, sorry, when the simplistic way of making sense of it is when it actually does make sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the whole thing is all complicated. People don't get, why is that happening? Why is that happening? Why is that happening? And then you take a step back and go, because it's supposed to.
Yeah.
That makes sense of it.
That's one of the really difficult things for people to understand, is that incompetence, when well integrated into a bureaucracy, is a gold mine, because it becomes a request for funds to solve that incompetence later. So if you're a really, really great criminal organization, you're very good at maintaining a superficial front that fucks up all the time so that it can get more funding later. And a great example of that is the FBI, and every major like federal institution that was enacted as a monopoly placeholder to continue to oppress the public.
Yeah, that incompetent front as well. What's your take on, like, we've got like Biden
Oh
in
yeah, no,
America.
no,
We've
no.
had
Like,
Boris. I mean, it's whole.
yeah,
There's
yeah. That's the. I describe it as the bobblehead on the front of a bulldozer. It's very distracting. It's very annoying. If you're going to get run over a bulldozer and there's a bobblehead on it that looks like that, you're probably going to be looking at that. So it makes sense, but it has fuck all nothing to do with anything other than it being an annoying little distraction attached to something else that's actually behind the action. So the more you understand, like that's really just there to play with the people who haven't left the crib yet, you're less inclined with taking crib notes, you know?
yeah. So it's kind of alluded to it myself. Their position and the part they're playing, that is a psyop within itself as such.
Well,
Because
yeah, but it's also very important to understand that at the exact time when I say that, you can, if you're only watching the bobblehead and you don't know that the bulldozer is there, you can still accurately understand a lot of shit that's going wrong in the world. You just don't understand why it's happening. So you're like, oh, just watch that bobblehead. Went over there and then that went poof. And then it went over there and then that went poof. But so it does kind of work in a way at the same time, but it's so maddening because it's actually infinitely more complex than that.
yeah, I mean, I've always kind of on the complexity of things. I've always said to somebody, if you want to see or understand the simplicity of it, or just take a look at your leaders, because to me that is unfathomable. Just I could watch old George Bush scenes for comedy, just for pure
Yeah.
comedy.
Yeah.
It's hilarious, but
Yeah.
it's that same place where it's like, how has this happened? How is it continuing to happen? Because it's got worse. I don't watch TV and all that kind of stuff, but obviously I come across the clips through my own way of sort of coming across them. And Biden he seems worse.
Oh,
And we've had Boris over here. He's a bumbling buffoon that everybody knows that he's a bumbling buffoon, but and people would argue the point of there not being, I guess, a conspiracy, but at the same time acknowledge that your leaders are playing a part of incompetence. And I don't know, how does that happen? How do you explain that if you actually can rationalize it as something that makes sense? To me, it just doesn't make sense.
It makes
You can
perfect
do all the
sense.
research you want, but actually, if you just analyze the people in the positions of so-say power and how they conduct themselves,
I think
it doesn't make sense. It is actually just nonsense.
no, it's that if you've
Oh, you're
never
freezing me.
if you've never thought about something and you're presented with a very simple explanation and you're busy and you're tired from just trying to like go to fucking work and survive as a human being, you accept that simple answer not because you actually believe it, but because you don't have the energy
Oh, sorry, dude.
What's up?
You've gone all sort of slow and robotic sounding.
Okay, can you hear me now?
It's happening. Have you heard that yourself? Sort of glitches.
It
I don't
happens
know.
every once in a while. Can you hear me now?
I don't know if it's because of the video.
I
Yeah,
don't
it's still a bit slow and distorted. Maybe try lose the video. I don't know if it's the
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, that sounds better.
Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
I've not normally had the video. I think
Yeah, that's fine.
it possibly just gives that little lag.
So all I was saying is
Sorry,
that
I don't know if you want to say what you said again then.
sure. What I was saying is that a lot of it is that people just don't have the energy for the complexity. And for me to really understand it, I've had to sit down and read like dozens upon dozens of books and study it for tens of thousands of hours for decades, and then go through various different like emotional processes in order to be able to even conceive of something that massive and then actually understand it for what it is. Ain't nobody got time for that. Straight and fucking simple. They need other people to do the work for them before they'll be willing to even set one foot down that road. So a lot of why this makes so much sense to people, it's not because it makes any damn sense to people. They're tired and they're busy doing other shit.
Yeah, they just, as you alluded to before, they're just a bit too lazy. But I guess that's where we come in. I do want to ask you about that. You've got the white rabbit as your symbol. What's the thought process there
So White Rabbit
on
symbolically
your
is a lot.
conspiracy synergy?
Yeah, we can think of it in the contemporary as like the Matrix, Follow the White Rabbit, which is itself a plug for Alice in Wonderland and Lewis Carroll, Through the Looking Glass, that whole kind of mythos that goes to it. You can look at rabbits in nature as they're they're nimble and they can get away. It's you tend to juxtapose them with like sort of foxes and predatory cats and stuff like that. Within the symbolism for my own show, I have the shadow aspect, which hasn't really been introduced yet, but will be in the coming years. Is represented by the predatory juxtaposition for the rabbit. You can look at other interpretations for the symbolism, and rabbits can overlap with fear. And so there's anytime that you start to break down symbolism, it goes in all kinds of different directions. And so there's both what something is and then the usage of it and what it's supposed to be emblematic of. But what it is emblematic of within my show is digging deep and looking into the truth and going down those rabbit holes and paying credit to the people who came before us that tried to give those breadcrumb trails that we'd be able to follow and then pass that along to the public so that they'd all be able to follow along.
Yep. So I thought another thing with the White Rabbit is the magic and the pulling the rabbit out of the hat. Is there any thought process with that? I wondered.
No, it definitely overlaps. So that's the division between magic and sorcery. And in the later episodes, I start to go into the non-materialistic cult kind of stuff a lot more. I sort of foreshadow it as an introduction, but I literally have within the show me pulling the rabbit out of the hat and stuff like that at different points. So I'm sort of tipping a hat to all those different plot points along the way to the big reveal, which is that things are much more energy oriented than we as individuals or as a species have really come to realize and appreciate yet.
You said about your people being a bit too lazy to read. I got to commend you on your library. Your library's looking good, man. I like it. I do like that shot. And have you read all your books?
I think it's the way
you sound like a well-read person.
Anyone who's reading books all the time is always in the middle of reading 50 books. So I haven't read all of them. I'm constantly reading.
Yeah.
That's one of those things where it's like some books you'll only ever end up reading segments from and you'll get what you need from it. Others, you kind of need to finish them. So I'm done huge amounts of them. I'm not anywhere near finished all of them. I'm constantly in the process. Yeah.
So if you want to introduce somebody that's, kind of come in from a far away perspective to take a closer look at what we're trying to get people to take a closer look at, would you recommend any particular book that you sort of found is...
This is what I designed my show for, was to try and be the thing that people would use as an introduction, because then automatically you're given like hundreds of different things that the individual can then gravitate towards based on what they're interested in. And I'm so much of the opinion that we're so used to a consumer society that you can't give people the truth. You can give them an introduction to the truth and then let them pick the avenue to it that they feel is best suiting, So it's like, if they don't have a choice in the matter, they don't want to play. But if you give them a lot of different choices in a very quick encapsulation, then they're able to go their own way. So that's what I've tried to do.
Have you actually got a favorite book, not one to introduce to other people or sort of encourage them to read, but just one that stands out that you've read yourself?
No,
on your journey of understanding that stands out?
Well, I've always found that they each offer their own things, and some of them will be more meaningful in certain windows of time. So I can think of things that I've been very appreciative to get out of books, but there isn't any like singular favorite. This is the go-to, be all, end all. I don't see it that way. I haven't experienced it that way.
Yeah. Okay. We'll go back to what we were talking earlier. You saying about the struggles of the reality, and so want to get your take on what's going on, the Canada's perspective with the monarchy, because obviously over here right now it's the big news. It's, when you talk about the struggle and identifying the people, right now it's a nightmare here. It is an absolute nightmare. It's there's no escape from it, and it really, for me, really hammers home that, I don't know how to put it nicely. It's just the brainwashed.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how to put it, but
no.
But how is it?
Well, kind of what you're alluding to with like the state of mind of people, and what you're talking about being emblematic of that. The worship of monarchy, basically, and how that's still very much a thing there. And that's a fucking scary feeling. Like, I hate the monarchy, and that's any monarchy. And that doesn't mean that you have to have a history behind you anywhere on this earth. If you stand up and you think you have special rights and privileges over other people because you deem yourself appointed by God, you're a fucking jackass. And so long-standing lineages of that shit that have been used to rape and pillage the planet that then culminate in people who are in a perpetual Stockholm syndrome worshiping it so that they can get more of it and then pass the torch of it onto a next generation and burn them down with all of their shit is like, oh dear God, how are any of us putting up with this? So that's kind of like a likeness to what I experienced with the whole COVIDian kind of like phase that we just saw unfold over the past couple of years. So I feel for you, man. That's got to be really fucking awful to be in the epicenter of that crock pot. I'm in like the periphery of it in Canada, where we're just bitches who salute in the periphery of the queen. You know, we're not close enough to catch like a fart out of her freshly fallen corpse, let alone, you know, go to the funeral. But we're still, I don't know, expected to kind of just be polite and nice about it. And that in and of itself pisses me off. So it's one of those things where it's like, it's a transition as a species to come to realize that, wait a minute, these aren't people who we should be worshiping. We should actually be honest with ourselves and realize that it was always horrible, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's my feeling is kind of what's worse is that desire to be worshipped or the people that's doing all the worshipping, you know, because that's what I struggle with.
Yeah.
It's, yeah, I've always kind of felt that whole psychology there is crucial. It's kind of like the happy slave, isn't it? You know, the willing of all these tributes to Her Majesty and Your Majesty. And it's like, where does that mind state even come from? Where do you, why is it there? Why do you still believe it? What have they done? And I thought this experience right now really hammers home the true disconnect of what we're told reality is and what reality is as well. Also, you see all the papers and they kind of give the impression that we're all devastated. And it's like, are we? Are we really? I mean, the people are, you know, but and I do know people, you know, got a bit too far of it. But on the whole, I don't think they are. I don't think they speak for everybody. And but still, we're going through our morning right now. So even if you try not to be affected by it, you are. We're affected. I've got a day trip supposedly supposed to be taking place on Monday. Where, funnily enough, I'm actually going to Windsor. And I don't live by Windsor, but we're going to Windsor that day because Legoland's in Windsor, and I'm supposed to be taking the family to. So we've had that cancelled. We've booked a hotel, and it's just a palaver, man. And oh yeah, it's horrendous. I think you would be struggling. It's a real struggle for people. We've had it before with the Jubilee earlier this year. That was I think that however long it was, the 2 days, and you just had to switch off. And yeah, it's hard work. Really hard work. And yeah, they've cancelled the football games and stuff. And part of me thinks it's probably a blessing because they've got all these reasons for doing it. But I think if they really did it, maybe they get to see the reality. Because I'd like to think there'd be a lot of booing going on and stuff, and maybe give us a chance to get that balance. Because you know, people are entitled to love Her Majesty, but people like myself don't, and I think we should be entitled to have that opinion as well about walking over eggshells and scared that you're going to offend all these I don't know what psychophantic psycho fans. You know, it's crazy times, man, crazy. But
yeah, I think that's a great way of sort of like drawing. Well, that's a great way of drawing the reality. Is that on the surface there are those sort of I don't want to say dichotomy. There's a spectrum of socially acceptable behavior in response to what the media has deemed a tragedy. And so on the surface, you can either be happy about it or you can be sad about it, or you can kind of basically just shut your mouth about it and not necessarily do anything or show anything. But under the surface, it becomes more of like a horseshoe. That's more of the reality. Are you necessarily happy, or is that simply what you're showing because you're required to show that for everybody? And so it is kind of one of those interesting things of where do you draw the line between what's real versus what's on the surface, and how that actually goes underneath that to connect us in a broader spectrum of how we actually feel, which is that sometimes if people go through a lifetime of worshiping something like that, and then they reach a transition in themselves where they no longer feel that way, they can still basically just play along, you know? And so a lot of us get caught up in those sort of processes of socially playing along until eventually it reaches a breaking point, and then it just goes completely the other direction very quickly. So I think we're in like the prolonged period of people who genuinely believe this and were indoctrinated and swore allegiance their entire life, sort of being acclimated to less pressure to feel like they have to act that way. And then it's just sort of the gradual onset of awareness and awakening that comes out of that over time. And I've that's sort of my sense of how people grapple with things and then come out of them. It's different layers of what they put on the surface versus what's actually going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, well, the surface level is never quite what it really is it? Really? And
Yeah.
like I
Yeah.
said, the newspapers and the general media, it is all this talk about people being shocked that it's happened. It's like, but she's 96 years old. I was in shock. It's what was it? I don't know.
She was immortal. She was God.
hard-
Don't you understand that?
It's actually a relief to be able to speak to somebody because I've had to just shut myself off. But I don't do the media, as I said, but I don't really do social media. But I have a little gander from time to time, and I've had to just stay away. I can't even handle that. I'll be honest. It's not even all the groveling and all the tributes and all that stuff. Even the people on the other side that are going a bit extreme with it and sort of celebrating and sort of going, "Oh, glad she's dead," and do you know what I mean? It's just I've had to kind of disconnect from it altogether, really. But
yeah, it's one of those things where she's a figurehead, and because of that, people are almost like happy to celebrate the idea of off with her head, which I think is also kind of too far. But at the same time, it's like the absurdity of continuing to entertain or tolerate the premise of a monarchy is so surreal that I can almost understand that reaction as mockery, because its very existence is a mockery of sanity. So making a mockery of the insanity almost makes sense, but then it's insensitive. So that's what I mean. We're kind of caught in that superficial dialectic when under the surface it's much more complicated.
yeah, there's the sanity of it all is beyond comprehension, really. I mean, one thing I've sort of seen from a detached perspective, there seems to be something going on where people are leaving marmalade sandwiches for her. Have you heard about this?
That would make sense. She had the interview with Paddington Bear, right? And yeah. Oh my God.
I don't. There seems to be there's some sort of connection with Paddington Bear. I have no idea what it is. I just heard about it. And
cradle to the grave infrastructure. It would make sense that they do that. So you can look at some things similarly for our sexual impacts. A good example is that there's a higher incidence of rubber fetish in England because it rains more and people wear rubber boots. And so if you understand how much we're imprinted by or affected by those simple associations that are then repeated throughout our life, it actually becomes quite a profound manifestation later on.
yeah, right. We've approached an hour. I've got this sort of idea. I've not done it yet with the show, but I've got this idea of sort of separating into 2 hours. And you stay as long as you like, but maybe you sort of have it in mind that we're going to go into part 2 now. So
Okay.
I don't know, we'll step it up or where we go with this. But as I said, I wanted to kind of go with the sort of weird and more spiritual components of it. And we kind of dive straight in there. But let's stick around with where we're at, because the whole royal thing and that whole psychology of it, I think it is a crucial factor in understanding, what the problem is and probably what the solution is as well. Because it is, of all the insanities, for me, it's the ultimate insanity. I don't fathom it. That whole concept of a royal, when I kind of come to that realization of things being the way they are. One thing I remember was seeing the royal crest. I think it says "Duet Mon Droit" or something, and it says that I think it means something along the lines of the divine right to royal. And it's like, kind of come to the realization that there is a suggestion through the royalty that they are saying we rule through divinity as if we're connected to the gods themselves or something. And I find that quite mind blowing when I came to understand that, and I've never got how that's not questioned more. What's your take on that? Where does it come from? Where, I said I made that connection with someone like David Icke. I think he might go into a place that kind of offers you an avenue of understanding for that. And I'm not saying go in there, but it does seem to. How long is this thing in the making? Where did it come from? And what's your take on that? Like the true depths of it.
Well, kind of what I was talking about before, beyond a certain level, beyond a certain level, it's literally just the forces in nature that work through us as people, and that we're much more affected by than we're consciously aware at any given time. So if you break it into like literally thousands of years stretches of evolution of time and the various different sort of like epochs of our consciousness and the transition between ages and stuff like that, then you can get into what the manifestation of monarchy is and what it's intended to represent. And it's sort of like a false idol in and of itself. And so it's always kind of existed to uh, oppress and to keep down other people under the auspices of doing the right thing or of um, because a lot of these people genuinely do think of themselves as gods or as doing God's work. And if you understand the esoteric in certain allegiances, that's actually technically not true in the sense of a one God, but true in the sense of they can be aligned with something that we might think of as being more of a God. So an example of that is like an interdimensional communication of some sort. Or if not a communication, then being receptive to a particular kind of resonance or a particular modality of conduct. And a simple materialist like frame of reference for that would be that inbreeding increases the incidence of psychopathy over time. So if you look at the lineage of royalty, there's a lot of inbreeding going on. They're marrying their cousins, and that's pretty normal. And that was called the Great Game historically. And that's when you have these monarchies marrying their cousins and shit, going to other countries to then use their citizens as pawns in the great game of trying to rule the world. And so there's been a long-standing evolution of that kind of psychosis and delusion, which, when compounded and fed upon itself, gets worse and worse over time until eventually it becomes full-blown psychopathic. And so from the materialist lens of how these people breed and conduct themselves, it's parasitic and vampiric in its nature, which then, if you understand the energetic resonance of, lends itself to being vessels of that which is inherent to existence itself. And evil is a very real thing. So if you understand the axiomatic divide between love and fear at the core of existence and how that comes to overlap with the force of involution versus evolution, you can understand in those 1,000-year sort of stretches, those like multi-thousand-year stretches, that certain people would entertain the delusion that they are righteous and operating on behalf of a god, genuinely believing themselves that they are doing the right thing. And in the longer stretch of humanity, that can kind of be made sense of, because ultimately we come to realize that they're full of shit, overthrow them, stand up against it, and in doing so realize our innate sovereignty and human rights. So they play the part of Satan, which is Satan, the adversary. And that is something that operates from within us, and we ourselves lend our energy and the lineages of our bloodlines too. And so that's sort of a dual framework of looking at the phenomena. The materialist lens of breeding over and over again, creating psychopathy and passing that along just for power's sake. And then you have the other lens of it, which is the forces in nature that, as people go down that direction in a materialist way, those forces in nature get more and more of a say until eventually at a certain point you're asking yourself, is that person even making decisions anymore? Or are they so corrupt and rotten that it's just this other fucking thing that is speaking through them? And a lot of what monarchy is like almost the people who have not only enticed the idea of wearing the ring, but they are no longer capable of separating themselves from it. They're more like Gollum than they are like Smeagol. And that's what has happened over the onset of the emergence of the continuation, the lineage, and all the way up to the contemporary of the existence of the monarchy. It's those who wore the ring, kept wearing it, and now they're just disgusting. And that's sort of how I would describe the transitional force of their emergence and the force that they have played in human history.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. One thing I've sort of kind of joked about, not just in not actually in her death, but in her life, is we're bombarded with the propaganda of the royals, and I found that no matter how nice they try to make her look, she just looks evil to me.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I've never understood how how people can't see it. She could have the biggest smile on her face, and I found that over time she just got worse and worse and worse. And obviously, we're just seeing it everywhere now. And it's just like, do people not see that? To me, that face looks evil, and it's even more evil because it's so smiley and trying to look nice, but it just can't achieve it. It is but yeah,
I'll give you a
people
good
don't. People are still laying the marmalade sandwiches, and
Yeah, no, I agree with your assessment, actually, that it does just on its face look kind of evil. It actually sparks an analogy in my mind when you talked. It's like, how could they not see it? There are two things I'm going to say about that. One is a line from a song, which is a really beautiful line. And it's that the song is this dude, it's Westfall, I think, or something like that. And it's just telling the story about this guy who went into the woods and murdered this girl, and it's sung in a very upbeat, kind of like casual, nice, folksy kind of way. So it's weird and it's creepy like that. And it gets to this song, this lyric later on, and it says, "All of these people, like taking their pictures, thinking that they could see the evil in me." And this isn't verbatim; I'm butchering the line, but it's like, evil doesn't look like anything. And so there's this very like intuitive association that we've come to think of evil as, which we're taught basically by Disney movies, that it's this very simple kind of thing, and that's what evil looks like. And in
yeah,
one sense, that's just horrifically off and not true at all. Evil looks like your best friend. It looks like someone who you would never would suspect would betray you. I'd say Obama is more emblematic of the charisma that is evil than necessarily someone like the Queen. But at the exact same time, if you look at both of those motherfuckers over their evolution, they look more like Disney evil as they get older. Both Obama and the Queen and everyone who sort of sells their soul to these entities becomes more cartoonishly evil on their damn face over time. And it's just like baffling that you're right. People wouldn't even be able to see it. Once it goes past the point of not even being a secret, it's like you can't not fucking see it. So it's surreal, man. It's
yeah,
it's an interesting thing.
it's funny you should say Obama, because I do recall a long time ago, and he always kind of presented himself in this sort of funny, charismatic way. But I remember I can't remember what he said, so I'm not going to even try and quote him. But I just remember the instance where he was talking about something in relation to going to war, and he kind of made a statement in a serious way, and I actually found it terrifying. He actually terrified me more so than I've ever felt any sort of public figure do before.
Yeah,
So I didn't put that sort of connection of the evil, but I actually felt a fear
yeah.
from him, and I think it's because of the way he normally presented himself, and then the way he presented himself in that instance, and what he was presenting at that time, that sent a shiver through me.
Yeah,
So I know exactly what you said with the
that's a
Obama.
good example of psychopathy, and that's sort of what I'm describing as real evil. Real evil is better at being cunning and looking like your friend than it is at hiding its actual nature. And so the second point, you kind of like jogged my memory that I was going to touch on that I'd started before, was the idea of that smile and that fake smile. A good analogy for that is Christian Bale when he was doing the performance of Patrick Bateman, sorry, in American Psycho. He based that performance off
Yeah.
of the interview that Tom Cruise did on Letterman. And the reason he did that is because Tom Cruise was just intensely friendly, like smiling the whole time, but there was just like nothing in the eyes. And so that's kind of the portrayal or presentation of friendliness, when behind that there's just fucking nothing there. And yeah, that's sort of like dropping the mask that these people wear. And the description they use for what you felt with Obama, that's a great example of it. Every once in a while you'll watch them and they'll show you who they really are. They show you, and it's like, if you know to look for it, like people who know how much of a pedophile Biden is, it's like we've seen all the videos of him like groping all of these people, and just it's so intensely uncomfortable that it's like, how in the shit could other people not just see that for what it is? But it's like, yeah, it's really tough to figure out what something is objectively versus the spell that people are under, to view it very differently subjectively.
Yeah, it certainly is a spell. It's funny once again that you mentioned Tom Cruise, because you've articulated there something that I feel like I've kind of sensed, but maybe not put it into that sense. Because my wife, we've almost fallen out a little bit, because she loves the Top Gun movie, and she's gone to see the other one that's just come out recently, and I've been trying to articulate why I don't like Tom Cruise from back in the day, and I said it's that grin. And I never put that connection of the empty eyes and the soullessness there, but I think it is that kind of, it is that grin. There's something about that grin that's I've always found a bit disturbing, and especially in his earlier days, there was that I just couldn't. I try to explain why I can't watch Top Gun, and it's like plain and simply I can't do the grin. The grin is a bit too much, and in general, I've always found that with the talk about evil and the presentation, Hillary Clinton was one of those big ones for me. Actually, I find her a bit demonic, and it's because she's always smiling that I find a bit unnerving. That's when she's presenting herself as so nice. It's kind of the opposite, a bit like the Queen in the same way. The more she smiles, the worse she looks. You know.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I guess I think that's the gift and the curse of seeing things this way. Maybe when you were alluding to earlier about how it's a struggle, and I think that for me in my journey, it's a struggle of kind of almost seeing. It's kind of like the inversion, I guess, the upside down, where things are presented as something so nice and is actually completely opposite. And I've always seen that as that devil, that Satan, what as you said is the opposite of what it perceives, or what people perceive it to be, is the opposite of how it presents itself. It's present itself in a nice package, but it's the opposite. It's kind of, I guess, it's a bit like they live. You know, have you seen that film?
Yeah, no, I've seen it.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, you've got to put the glasses on to see them for what they really are. And this, once you've kind of taken that look, then you can always see it. But yeah, scary stuff, man. Scary stuff. What's your sticking with the Royals? What's your take on where we kind of go from here now? Because it does seem to be a crucial sort of point in our time of where we're at and where we're going. I mean, there's a lot of people suggesting that this might be used to push the cashless agenda for one. I know obviously we've got King Charles coming into power now, and a major ambassador for the whole climate change and Agenda 2030 and stuff. So it's quite worrying where we go with this now. Well, what's your sort of take on where we're at and where we're going in terms of how this death?
Right. So a lot of people
And what
don't
how it plays
understand how methodically planned this shit is, and it's usually 50 to 100 years minimum in advance that they'll have an approximate trajectory for major things that they want to unveil and impediments to those things being unveiled. You could regard the old guard itself in its many different manifestations and continuation of existence as that which has been an impediment to moving into the next stage of the ops that they're trying to roll out on us as a species. And so a good point of reference for that is that the Central Intelligence Agency is going to attempt to decentralize at some point. And ultimately, they would want to decentralize under the guise of us demanding it in the face of their egregious violation of constitutional stipulations. And you'd want to see similar disbanding or removing of finance or investment of trust across the board in mainstream institutions. And the reason is because you can look at the algorithmic warlike models that were used in Syria as a point of reference for militia management moving into the future of warfare. So as these major central institutions decentralize, they lose the targets that are on their back and they're able to go dark. And as they go dark, they're able to begin to implement psyops that they've been building for the last 50 to 100 years, stretching into the next 50 to 100 years, at the discretionary privilege of the truth that they have been consolidating under the hub of those different branches. So you could say CIA, NRO, NSA, all of them. Throughout your acronym, they are different cogs in a bureaucratic system that we as a species have existed inside of for the full duration of time that we have been on this planet. Now they want to give us the permission to think of or believe things that are more sophisticated. And in order to do that, they have to bring down the pre-existing infrastructure that the past lies that they had told relied on. So that's news media. It's my personal contention that a big part of why we're seeing news media go as horribly full-blown, awfully stupid as it has been is on purpose by design, because it needs to be that stupid for people in the world to understand how stupid it is to then demand that something change, which will gradually come to unveil the alternative media itself. And then once conspiracy goes mainstream, it becomes a shit show because they can use the way in which they have seeded certain trains of thought internally within our own minds to then fall within the framework of whatever psyop they're trying to play long term. So this is one of those things where it's like it's a war of attrition, and people don't understand that these are like forces in nature that use these bureaucratic institutions and then shed them once a different environment emerges, and they're fully aware of how that environment is going to emerge because they're partially playing into it. One, because that's what a predator does. You understand how your prey moves. And two, you understand if the sun's coming up and you're more likely to be exposed. And that's sort of what's happening in an energetic, resonant way right now. People are becoming aware of what's actually going on, and they are fucking pissed. So you need to give them a situation that makes them feel like they're winning rather than just embarrassing themselves again, moving into a much longer situation. And so we're looking at the next few years and decades as being that sort of chew toy struggle between the superficial vestiges of these much deeper arteries of control being revealed for what they actually are, so that we will destroy them, so that we ourselves can then plant the seeds of the next generation that will likely be fertile grounds for transhumanism and all this shit over time. So it's a pendulum swing back and forth, huge fucking kind of like biblical prophecy revealing itself. And generally speaking, people don't have any understanding of history, so they look at it as, oh, this bitch died this week, which means everything's happening now. But it's actually like, nah, man, this shit's been like unfolding and planned for and have contingencies for everything. And so once you understand it on that level, you're just like, oh yeah, no, King Fucktard is going to go hardcore with climate change because he's been down with the whole Club of Rome agenda as like a figurehead moving forward with it. And whenever the bitch finally croaked and you were able to get him out front, of course that's going to become like the drum beat that they're all pounding on. So I see it as like that level of looking at decades of this shit unfolding and how they try and use that as the narrative scaffolding to like harness our emotional thrust, and how we in essence have to basically just say, fuck all of that. We're the one who makes the conversation. You're not going to be creating this framing for decades on end anymore. And we're going to build alternative systems and infrastructure and a way of being a human being that is in touch with nature, not the way in which they have tried to prescribe our nature for us, you know?
Yeah. I don't know if I misunderstood what you said. So basically what you're kind of alluding to is the controlled demolition again there. But you said something amongst what you're saying about the planned destruction of the media, and then using that as a path to bring in the alternative media. Can you go into that a bit more, what you meant
so
there?
basically just think about it this way. Hollywood is a predictive programming matrix. They're able to, through the exposures that we have over the emergence of our natural selves in life, give us kind of glimpses of things that then create a longer impression over time. If they do that enough, you're able to kind of like seed in the psyche of the public at large certain trends, which you then step on later, almost like kneading a dough. It has to go through a certain amount of being kneaded before it has the elasticity to become its next stage. So I usually use the metaphor of cooking as a point of reference for what they're doing with us as a population. In order to understand that, it goes through a variety of different paradigm changes. Eventually, that dough is going to be covered in tomato sauce, and it's going to be in an oven of a particular heat for a very short time so that it forms up and becomes something that then moves into the next process of cooking. A lot of how this works when you understand the various convergence of these bureaucratic processes is that, like I said, they plan for like 50 to 100 years. So the emergence of the alternative media, one, they can observe that in real time, and they basically take the algorithms of our data analytics, which are then funneled into the pentagram's brain to give them a real world kind of approximation of how we would conduct ourselves as people. But in the longer stretch of time than that, they wouldn't want to just be doing that in the feedback loop of how they observe us. They'd actively want to be participating in the outcome of how they have chosen to cook us. So there are layers to this. What I'm describing is like when you get into the forces in nature that are trying to cook with the species over hundreds, if not thousands of years margin, which is infinitely beyond the frame of reference for the vast majority of people who do this shit. The vast majority of people who do this shit are basically just on a contractual basis internally within these bureaucratic entities. So that would be like the motherfuckers who are working for the Pentagon don't understand how that is itself just a component of footwork for larger things that orchestrate the march of the species at large. And so that compartmentalization makes it so that the vast majority of the people who are actually doing the shit that I'm describing are completely unaware of the bigger picture. But when you're able to zoom back enough, you're able to understand that whether it is the forces in nature doing the cooking or we as conscious entities making those decisions, it doesn't change the outcome. They want things to emerge in a back and forth pendulum way, almost like playing chess, so that they can use our felt sense of being within that game as the catalyst for trying to create the future that they want. And they're doing that both in the past through the movies that they have showed us and in the future through the ways in which they're trying to goad us forward. So it's one of these like omnipresent full spectrum dominance kind of things that you have to start to look into, like Tavistock and the emergence of like MK Ultra and how that was ultimately designed to like refine the abuse of population control, and how wars themselves are just test labs that are put forward under like narrative scaffolding. It's like, oh, we need the Vietnam War for these reasons. It's like, no, the fuck you don't. You needed to test all of this crazy shit on populations, and that's what it's actually for. So once you understand that we're coming out of a lineage of a 100-year war that has never, ever stopped, instead it's become infinitely refined and micromanaged specifically to every individual, that gives you a better sense of what the future looks like. It isn't these centralized institutions anymore. It's the stories that they have told us our entire fucking lives that become the weapon of war.
Yeah, where do I go from that?
Oh,
To
that's
me, what you said about the
shit.
wars,
That's
because
like, yeah, that's like 50-year span level shit. So it's tough to have those conversations, but yeah, I know what you mean.
well, no, but you've just condensed it really. You've blown my mind because I mean, for one, I've had this sense myself that I've not been able to articulate, but the MK Ultra is a fundamental component in what's going on, and I've kind of felt that it's not, if people kind of perceive it as an individual sort of mind control, trauma based mind control thing, and I've felt no, that's like 50, 60 years ago. We don't know where that's gone now. I've kind of felt that that is a collective process that we're going through now. That's what we're now experiencing, is the evolution of that.
That's
that
what
understanding. It's kind of remote control.
So that exactly is it. They do the trial balloon select kind of thing. They can either bleed that to the public so that we'll think that it's taken care of and it's stopped, or we'll frame it in a particular way, or they can basically do whatever they want to it in order to come to a point of telling us about it and hiding it from us at the exact same time. And that's in order to safeguard themselves from the karmic consequence of doing this shit. Ultimately, we of our own volition are the driving force of implementing it and perpetuating it. So they need to foster and foment the creation of our exposure to it, but then we need to believe that it's all us and it's completely organic without fully questioning it. So MK Ultra was like the introduction to omnipresent MK Ultra experiments that have never fucking gone away and have reached a level of integration, dexterity, and basically, like, we like to think of things as being one thing or another. No. We're at the point where it's like 20 or 30 different things connecting and combining together to create what we regard as one thing. And so that's the level of sophistication and intellect that they have orchestrated the stage of global war as it's happening right now. Because we're in the Third World War right now. It's just that the stage of war, the battlefield has changed, so people don't know to see it for what it is anymore.
I was going to ask you that, actually, when you were just alluding to the 100-Year War. I think there's always a conversation about World War III and at that point and when it's going to come. And I've kind of always felt, I've even said it to my children, God bless, it's like my child would bring it up whatever it is. I think we're in World War III. We've been in it for a while. And I've had that sense for not just like the last 2 years, but the last 10 years. I've felt that World War III is now. And I guess you're suggesting a similar thing.
Yeah, well, when you understand the lineage of
Yeah, on
these
that
these
same.
secret societies, it's like it's the last will and testament of Cecil Rhodes, which paved the way for the Milner Group, which became the foundation of the Round Table, which slowly emerged in a variety of different organization and manifestations over the time. Starts with the Royal Institute of International Affairs, or Chatham House was its nickname, and then that was rebranded as Council of Foreign Relations in America, and that's because they didn't like the monarchy very much there. And it subsequently unfolded from there. It's the Trilateral Commission, the United Nations, like the Club of Rome. The Bilderberg is like a central group point of meeting for this. But it's like what all of that is a continuum. It's a continuity. It's not separate from one another. It's the same motherfuckers doing the same motherfucking shit. And then if you understand the people who were bankrolling Cecil Rhodes, whose will and testament set all this shit into motion, he was using the model of the Jesuits in order to go about creating his secret society. And he himself was a Rothschild man. So you have to look at the funding that goes into the emergence of that which on the superficial we can point to for the last 100 years, because that itself connects to the past few hundred years, which itself connects to the past few thousand years. So it's one of those kind of like those dolls that are just contained within other versions of themselves, and that's when it becomes fractal, and you're able to kind of like boil down and look at it as, okay, is it fucking good or is it evil? Is it in accordance with natural law or is it in violation of that? And that's sort of what we're seeing right now is there's no difference between the First World War and the Second World War. I can't remember the quote verbatim, but it's like the Treaty of Versailles was a 20-year rearmament, and that's true. The First World War happened to bring about the Treaty of Versailles so that they could build up to create the Second World War, in part to then bring about Israel, but that ties into the whole Zionist thing. So there's a lot going on. But even then, if you look at the stay behind units from Project Gladio internally within Italy, in order to allegedly combat communists, all that was perpetual warfare. So there's no difference between the First World War, the Second World War, or the Third World War. It has been 100 years fucking straight of us being lied to in order to create omnipresent perpetual war. And that's the world we live in.
I think a lot of people's argument that are sort of struggling to grasp with it is why that mind state of the long game? Why are people, like say Klaus Schwab, he's in his 80s now. Why has he got such an investment in the future that he's not actually going to be a part of?
Yeah. So
why are these people that have got enough money?
Yeah, when you start to
No, you
dive
can't
into that,
have.
it looks multi-pronged. One is that, so if you investigate dark Luciferianism, which Satanism is largely a front for, it appears as if the people who take it really, really fucking seriously, not the ones who are just playing along, they're sort of born into a caste system. It seems to be like associated with bloodlines and inheritance, and that may potentially mean that from the left hand perspective, you could be able to track or potentially even guarantee certain lineages of reincarnation. So some of these people who go into these long bloodlines of evil may reliably be able to reincarnate. And that could tie into an occult science based on the left hand path. I don't definitively know that. I'm not putting that forward as absolutely the case, but that's why I qualify it as when you start to look into a lot of this shit behind the scenes, you start to bump into all of the stuff that they know about what existence is that they're not telling us. And then at the same time, you're getting that from the right hand mystery school traditions, the emergence of the history of mysticism and like anthroposophy and Rudolf Steiner and Edward Casey and all that kind of stuff, trying to tell the species the truth at the same time, but also slowly enough that we all don't freak the fuck out. So from both sides of the spectrum, it's trying to harness the animal of the species, to some degree direct it. The left hand path is kind of doing it for the sake of themselves, but at the same time, like I described in those very long stretches of thousands of years, that itself can facilitate the emergence of us standing up in opposition. And that's when you get into the notion of Greek mythology of like the serpent had to become a dragon in order for him to be a hero. And so when you get into all of this shit on its full depth of what's going on, this becomes like stuff that has been unfolding for thousands of years. And it connects to a lot of things that we do not definitively have the answers to yet.
Well, go back to sticking with when you said about the alternative media almost being part of that chess move. I want to stick to that. What part are we playing now?
Oh yeah,
What do
okay.
you feel like?
So a lot of that is how fragmented we are. yeah, it's great that everyone has their own podcast. It's also awful because nobody's fucking listening to enough to be able to have a conversation other than in the fragmented, weaponized blips that we have been given over the course of the evolution of the alternative media. A good example of that is like Alexander Stitchin's work when it comes to like the Anunnaki tablets, or sorry, the Sumerian tablets, and then talking about the Anunnaki. It's like he completely misinterpreted and mistranslated that. But if you go into the New Age, a lot of people regard that as gospel. And I'm automatically, by saying that I'm questioning his translations, does not necessarily mean that at some point over the course of the human origin story, our genome or our makeup or our conscious awareness hasn't been screwed with in some capacity or another. A simple, like, a common point of reference for that being that people can think of like Terence McKenna talking about the stoned ape theory. So that's a materialist lens of viewing the idea that, oh, our integrating other life forms into ourselves dietarily could potentially factor into our conscious expansion. It's potentially a lot of stuff beyond just our diet. I mean, it's like if you get higher entities than ourselves, whether you call them angels, whether you call them like digital projections, however you frame that with your language, there's shit up there and it has influenced us as people. So this stuff is going on, but at the same time, we've been given very particular plot points to describe it with and to think of it as. And that's almost like the rails that a story is built on. And when those rails are built and the opportunity for that to talk about that story publicly is unfolded, people just go on the track that they have been set on, and they're not able to go any other direction than that because they're so enthused about the idea of talking about the truth that they've been trying to talk about for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years as the CIA has been building these tracks to eventually build up to the point where it decentralizes itself and we're seemingly in control of the conversation, when really that was a conversation that was built for us to just go off the wrong direction with, so that they could then pick up on those wrong directions and build off of it themselves. So for example, if you get into like all of this talk about Mars, if you understand the esoteric of that, it has certain inferences of war and transhumanism and stuff like that. But then you can get into it from like looking at the remote viewing and the channeling that the CIA has done to try and get glimpses of Mars's history. So it looks like we're basically coming up on the window of time where they're trying to get the alternative media to be the introduction to the human origin story that they want us to tell for them, so that the public will be up to a point of beginning to conceive of things beyond the spectrum of how we've previously described whatever the fuck it is happening on this planet. And I'll say that in the sense of like, if you look at the language that's used from a biblical perspective to describe angels, that overlaps with a lot of what anthroposophy describes as interdimensional beings. So a lot of this is like coming back to the basics of what we've been talking about for a very long time. We just have to be careful about the explanatory framework that we use and how we attempt to pin that down, because we're walking into a fucking trap. The CIA has been setting this kind of like narrative scaffolding in advance for like 50, 60, 70 years. And so that's a dangerous thing to be exposed to the light, because people are primed for misinterpretation, misrepresentation, and hostility to anyone who doesn't fall within the dogma of the group.
The new age is the new cage as such.
Yeah, basically. And that's been built up deliberately by Satanism and dark Luciferianism. It's fucked. It's like, it's really complicated how much they set this up in advance.
Yeah, I get that, and I've struggled with that myself, as the part you're playing, and you hear so much about sort of disinformation agents and that kind of thing. I kind of saying it earlier when I was talking about the likes of David Icke and Alex Jones and the people that are held up there as playing that part. And I've always been wary that everyone potentially is a disinformation agent, and it doesn't have to be by intention as such. I could be a disinformation agent, not because somebody's put me up to it, but because I'm putting out information that's not true or not right. I always use the analogy, you're barking up the wrong tree and there's a tree that's been planted for you in the first place. So that is always a danger. And I thought ultimately that's why you've got to be careful. You know, you said false idols. I'm very conscious of that. The false idols working, or, you know, you've got all these queen worshippers. That's an extreme nonsensical aspect of it. But then on the other side of it, you've got people that are seemingly woke that are now presenting their own messiahs and heroes as
the solution when it's also still part of the problem. So it's a tricky one. It's certainly a tricky one. How do
Yeah,
you?
well, that's what I mean. Is that's the cauldron that has been brewed on purpose to leave us in the midst of, so that it'll reach a fever point of uh, hostility, such that we, of our own volition, will attempt to demand or insist on some kind of authority. And so it's like we need to enter into these sort of mature conversations while simultaneously the forces of evil, if you want to just use a very simple term, will basically try and prey upon our vulnerabilities, our volatility, piss us off, and destroy the names of the best of anyone to try and foster the worst in everyone. And that's sort of what we're moving towards. And that's the test that we will endure as a species and as individuals. But it's also very much a trap. So yeah, that danger that you intuitively recognized, it's for good reason, because those of us who've been doing this the longest fucking time have probably been down the wrong road at some point or another. And it's coming back from how much other people are going to be put through that test for the very first time, only it's not going to be in secret, it's going to be publicly. And that's a lot more vicious and a lot more ego based. So it's going to be a tough road.
I want to ask you that in terms of, we're obviously dealing with dark material and dark subjects and the old, the cliche battle of good and evil. Where do you stand in terms of where we're at and where we're going? Are you positive? Are you negative? Are you somewhere in between? Are you, I've made the point on previous shows, and it's just in general in life, I've sort of had that understanding to say COVID and how that came about being crucial, because in one way it's taken things to the next level and has made things a lot harder, but at the same time the veil's been lifted and it's also increased the potential of people seeing things for what they really are.
Yeah.
So we kind of entered a fork in the road where things could get a lot worse or a lot better as a consequence of this now. So where do you see it in terms of this veil being lifted? Are we heading towards a better time or worse?
So the entire way in which you're framing
Or
the
something
question, the entire way you're framing the question is binary, and that's fine, because people have we typically approach things that way. The English language is like that, and it's
I
just.
did throw in or something else because
No,
I'm
I know.
conscious of that binary. I don't. Yeah.
No, I'm not holding it against you. I'm just saying it's both at the same time. And so rather than a fork in the road, I prefer to use the metaphor of a seed beginning to grow or burst out of its husk. From the husk's perspective, which is the centralized bureaucracy that has been government for as long as we've been around, or not as long as we've been around, but for the past few thousand years anyway. And so that's the husk of the seed. And that's starting to implode. It's breaking down. It's failing. It's falling apart. And that's because the environment around it and internally within it is changing. And so we are going to observe the husk of that seed breaking apart in a variety of different ways. And that's going to be awful. And it's going to adversely affect a lot of different people. And simultaneously, at the exact same time as that happening, the life force internally from within that husk is beginning to take root. And it's beginning to grow, and it reaches towards the light. So it's both at the exact same time. And ultimately, the way in which you as an individual can orient yourself towards the future that you want to arrive in is to find the courage to love, not to be afraid, and to speak the truth moving forward with that intention every single day. And that's the thing that makes it so that even if you find yourself in hard times, you understand your responsibility in the face of that, because a lot of this is not something that only depends on you. Something as simple as choosing not to wear a mask in a grocery store can mean a lot to the people who didn't have the courage to do that themselves. So being the person who's not afraid, who's able to go out there and to speak the truth, is to invest yourself energetically, and so too your destination in the future, based on making those courageous, love-oriented decisions every single day. And then that's going to be the thing that determines where you end up.
Yeah, so I was going to sort of try to segue towards solutions, and I think you've kind of alluded to that a bit there in itself. Love saves the day ultimately, and every little can help make a big step. But we are in a, I think it seems to be the world over. We're heading into like the energy crisis, and what is it? They're calling it the cost of living crisis.
They'll call it
They're
whatever
calling
they
it
need
that
for
on
us to
your
buy
side. Yeah. And people are buying it. People are buying it at the same time. I think that's been the dichotomy of this whole Queen situation. On one hand, you've got like the whole sat on the throne. I didn't see the speech, but apparently Charles gave a speech the other day where he sat on his throne with his crown and he goes there in his car. And I've seen some memes sort of suggesting the total value of all these different aspects of how he's being presented. But at the same time, while he's sat there within all these riches, he's given a speech about the hard times that we're all going through. And it's like, I don't know, I'm not sure how that happens, but that is the reality that we find ourselves in. And I see that's part of this controlled demolition. I myself am sort of struggling with how do we navigate this right now? I keep getting told off for leaving the lights on and stuff. And like, come on, that's part of the fear. We're being told that we're in a cost of living crisis, and we are in a cost of living crisis. But if you kind of buy it, then you're manifesting it. But at the same time, you can't be deluded as to not face that situation as what it is. So how do we navigate ourselves through this rough period now and
So
balance that kind of reality?
Yeah. A lot of change is granular. It's not we've been taught to think of change as if it happens all at once in one fell swoop, and we've been taught that by Hollywood so that we wouldn't appreciate the way that it really works. And it's tiny little bits that change every single day, and they affect other people around you, and that's important. So a simple way of conceiving of that is grassroots. A lot of what we need to do is to begin to create and invest our energy in and disseminate alternative frameworks of commerce, of interaction, of going about doing everything that we do, and not in a makeshift hodgepodge inadequacy, but in a way that creates better alternatives for everybody. So I'm taking the initiative to do this in my own way by reaching out to other people within the truth community to try and work together in order to be able to see actual viable solutions emerge. So that's a long-term thing. I'm creating the show. I'm doing protest work. I've gone around to houses wearing a rabbit suit, putting flyers in their mailboxes. I put up stickers around. It's a lot of little things that you do every single day, because once people actually see the situation for what it really is, not just the lies they've been told. And a good metaphor for this is like, look at the picture of a Big Mac versus the Big Mac, and then look at the Big Mac versus what actually is done to those various ingredients bordering on not even being food to create that motherfucking thing. A lot of people are still looking at the world like it's the picture of the Big Mac, and we got to get them to go behind that to actually look at the real thing, and then go behind that to look at the manufacturing processes, and then to go behind that to look at how it's actually designed to fucking kill you. And that's a big departure. And the more in which you do that in little ways every single day, that is the solution. It's just not the way Hollywood told you to see it.
Yes, a beautiful analogy. Thought you say Hollywood didn't tell you to see it, but he's just making me think of Michael Douglas and Falling Down. He gets his burger. And
Yeah.
have you seen that one?
Yeah, I've seen it. I know it.
Yeah, that's I guess that's a good metaphor of how to react with it as well, because he kind of goes off the rails with it, and it is a case of harnessing and using that energy constructively rather than letting it drive you to a point of despair and jumping off the pier at the end, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why the movies are always trying to give us that Michael Douglas version where he breaks down rather than where he gets his shit together and goes out and makes a better fucking world. And that's by design. It's to keep us enslaved by the stories we tell ourselves, never thinking that we can change things by changing ourselves.
We're approaching 2 hours now, and I've really enjoyed this. It's literally been an honor and a pleasure. It really has.
Give us an idea of sort of what you've got lined up in terms of work-wise, where you want to find your work. Just plug anything you need to plug, man, and do that kind of thing. And
yeah, so my whole deal is that I'm an artist. My website is teace.ca, so it's teace.ca. I give a lot away my stuff, so you can go and watch a variety of different shorts that I've done that are usually centered on very important issues, like 9/11 truth or doctor-assisted dying or any number of different things. And that's at teace.ca. My website for Conspiracy Synergy is conspiracysynergy.com. And that's built as an outreach tool for your friends and family who you don't feel as if you could talk to any of this stuff about, to get them up to speed on the basics so that gradually they're able to take flight and get into the really deep shit. I don't start with that. I think it's about getting people up to speed and doing it in an emotionally welcoming, kind, and conscientious way. So it's very much an outreach tool. But at the same time, those of you who are pros and who know your stuff very well, you can review it and laugh about it and kind of just get some additional exposures. Maybe you miss something along the way. You know, none of us are perfect. We're all learning all the time. So it's one of those things where it's designed for everybody to try and get them all together on the same page, talking about the stuff they need to go. And then we can try and build from there to make the world a better place. And so that's what I do. Most of what I do is just researching and reading. It's a show that's going to take me about 6 years overall to complete the entire thing. I'm about halfway done now. So any subject that I do, I'm always reading for about a year in advance to be able to adequately address the reality of the phenomena, because we need to actually understand it for what it is if we actually want to solve it in the real world. And I'm not trying to shirk how complex that is, but I am trying to make people smile a little bit more, stepping up to the plate of those complexities, because a lot of the work has already been done by extraordinary, exemplary, wonderful people before us, as well as those still alive today. And we just need to pass along that note to the public so that it's a song they're inclined to play along with, rather than pretend that it's just not there and there's nothing to see here, because we're done with that bullshit. We're at the point where we're ready to wake up as a species, but some of us are taking their sweet time and they keep hitting that snooze button. So that's my whole deal. I created Conspiracy Synergy as a way to get those people to wake up, not so grumpy.
Yeah, man, and I'm feeling it. I really enjoyed it. I did wonder, actually, sort of watching the videos. I'm looking forward to what's coming next. But in terms of the order that you've kind of brought them out so far, is there any sort of reason for like episode 1 to episode 2, the way you're bringing it out? Is it just as it comes, or have you got a certain idea of how you want it to be presented so that people kind of go through a process?
Yeah. It's a revealing. I mean? It's a revealing of the method as you do it. So part of it's gematria, when you understand the significance of each respective number. I haven't gotten too tied into that. I will be for the 9th episode, but that's when I start to break the materialist mold a little bit more. In essence, I'm just laying down the foundation of the basics to then create much more fully realized and elaborate portrayals of the reality later on. Because if you think from a very simple building block perspective, after you get those basics down, then you can start doing really incredible stuff with it. So it's sort of just been more of a slow start, and then both visually and from the content perspective, amps up and just goes like as far as you can go with it by the time the series is done. But that'll be like another 2 or 3 years before that's all finished.
And you said you want it to be a sort of a general reach to people, but at the same time, I've noticed you're not using YouTube. What's the thought process there?
Yeah, YouTube is owned by Alphabet. It's a censorship. It's a censorship engine, so it's not there to help anyone, and we should all try and move away from using that as a platform.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I thought that was the case, and I respect that, because you just bypass it straight away. But obviously, there is an element of that is detrimental at the same time, because it's kind of a paradoxical situation of wanting to reach the most people and not providing the platform, but then at the same time they're setting the
Well, I understand that premise. My whole fundamental underlying concept is this: if you literally find the courage to go and have conversations with other human beings every single day, then the world changes. But we've been bottled into siloed kind of nodes, which in one sense allows you to get that information out there, but more it's just to give you the impression that you're getting the information out there. What if the most important thing you could do is to have a conversation with a person who would never possibly be exposed to this before, but we're also invested in the digital that we're no longer present in the real? And so it's one of those things where I think that, yes, it's important in a way, but we've also had our attention focused to regard it as much more important than it actually is at the end of the day. Our communities and having the courage to talk to one another as friends, that's the most important thing. And it's like the digital has stripped us of that.
No, I agree fully. So you put a big emphasis on actually being proactive within the real world as such, rather than this digital infrastructure that, yeah.
Yeah, it's both, and that's the thing that so many
Brilliant.
people have lost because they're only willing to do one. And I'm like, no, it's both all the time. That's the only way to get through to people.
Well, I think you alluded to earlier about the controlling the narrative of the alternative media and the way that we're going, and YouTube is a great example of that. I have found for a long time now that I'm fed a lot of stuff and pushed in certain directions, and I've had to distance myself from it. And I need to get more on board with these alternative streaming sites and so forth.
Yeah.
Because I've actually only been loading to YouTube at the moment, but that's purely out of habit. I'm still growing. I'm still in the very early stages, and I've said from day one that I'm fortunate. I've heard about so many people who've got a big volume of work that's just been taken away from them because they've all put it in that one place. So I think you've been doing it about 2 years yourself, doing the stuff, and I'm just starting now. So we're in a fortunate position to not go there and maybe just bypass them altogether. And
well, yeah, in the particular format
YouTube,
I do,
basically.
Well, I've been doing this show for 2.5 to 3 years because of all the buildup from the art that I do that's original for it. But I've been doing the work in trying to get this truth out for almost 15 years now. And I used to do that through narrative. So my books, I'll touch on that. But I basically, because I was under the impression, and I think accurately so in that time frame, that you couldn't have a conversation about the truth with people, but you could give them a story that had a conversation about the truth. Now that it's actually hitting the fan, it's like you have to be much more direct about it. Be like, no, seriously, they're actually going to come and fucking kill your kids with these goddamn like experimental injections. And so it's like nature kind of primes me before things happen for a good stretch so that I'm in the right place and I'm ahead of the curve come time it actually hits. And so that's sort of what I've observed with myself, and very likely you've experienced in your own way through the evolution of your life and your exposures and where you find yourself. And you're right in that it just takes time of doing this to be able to do all those little things. It's a huge investment that people don't really have a familiarity with, so they can't appreciate how much goes into the little details. But it is one of those things where you'll just put it up on more platforms every week or month, and just be honest with how long it takes to build something like this. Because like you said, I've only been in it for 2.5 years in this particular way, 15 years in other stretches, but I'm bumping shoulders with people who have been doing it their entire lives. And we're all trying to learn from people who are doing it their entire lives. So it's really just like an all of us in it together kind of human journey. And some of us are further ahead than others, but we're all trying to catch up at the same time.
Yeah, man. But just quickly, I won't keep you, but you talk about the timing, and I do think that is quite amazing, your timing, because if you have been on your path for whatever reason for so long, but then to come out as pretty much as the shit hit the fan, you timed it well there. So that is definitely evidence of how would you phrase it, the syncs, I guess, and that being in alignment with something else for your time and the timing.
Oh yeah,
which is one way that I sort of term the synchronicities.
Yeah, when you really start to understand it, it's non-linear time, and you're basically looking for clues from your higher self, or if you want to call it spirit guide. It's kind of different for everyone, but the better you're able to see existence for what it is, the better you're able to recognize things for what they actually are, and then you invest in the truth. And when you do that, the floor doesn't fall out from under you as often. So if nothing else, you're not getting fucked over by investing your energy in lies. And that in and of itself is a better way to go about your life. So yeah, I'm very much, I've always been following those signs in a way in which it's more of like a life pursuit for me than it is something I'm just cluing into.
Yeah. Well, on that subject, I'll just say it is actually an anniversary of this my work in a way, because it's literally I've had to renew my hosting today. So thanks for being a part of that. That's just synchronistically the way it is. So you're part of the show's a form of its year's birth, because there's different aspects of it's been a long time in the making, but that's one aspect of it in terms of I've literally had to pay. I didn't get the show running. I paid for it, and it took about 6 months to even start. So it's not been running for a year, but I've been paying for it for a year. So So yeah, thanks for being here, man. I've really enjoyed it.
Yep, sure.
I've really enjoyed your work, and I look forward to more of it. And hopefully we can speak again some other time. And keep it up, man. Keep it up.
Thanks, dude.
Brilliant stuff.
Have a good one.
All right, man. You take care. You too, man. Take care. Cheers, boss. Bye-bye.
Wow. You know, I don't know what to say about that. I'm literally lost for words about that talk. Amazing, basically. I try not to be in awe of our guests, and that's going to be a process and a learning curve, I guess, as you go through it. But I got to be honest, found myself struggling to find the words to do justice to a conversation with this guy. He really did blow my mind, and it's amazing how he put into words so many things that I have felt on a deeper, more spiritual level. He seems to have come to a lot of the same conclusions and seen the same things, even though he's come to them in his own way. But yeah, that was an amazing talk. It really does represent why I'm trying to do this, and apologies for my own part in it if I just felt like I was stumbling and mumbling a bit, but yeah, we'll get better with that hopefully. If not, then I don't know what we'll do, but we'll have to find something else to do, I guess. But no, that was fantastic. It really was, and I really appreciate Teace giving us his time, and really grateful for that. It's gonna take a while to digest it completely, but I look forward to doing so. And like I said, it's a lot of what he's saying completely corresponds with a lot of what I've seen and a lot of what I feel also, because I think a lot of what he's saying is not things that we have seen. It's intuitive, and it's amazing how people through their own journeys come to such similar conclusions. So definitely I like mine, and I liked his mind. That's fantastic. Anyway, trying to get this show back on the road. It's at a bit of a gap for a variation of reasons. It's not easy trying to get guests on the show, and some people just don't respond at all. Some people do respond, but then still don't let it happen. And yeah, it's not an easy process trying to make things happen, but it's not going to stop me. I keep trying, and hopefully we will get more prolific with the action. And we're going to keep it coming, basically. But yeah, thanks to Teace for coming on, giving us his time. Really good stuff. Teace has been on the show now, so he's 4free2. If you're listening, so are you. Thanks very much, and goodbye for now. Bye-bye.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweigh the dangers which are cited to justify it. There is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions, and there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covetousness for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. No secret is revealed, 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 revealed.